Welcome to True Crime Cases, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Julia and Harry seemed like the perfect couple in their neighborhood. They were known as the golden pair. People admired Julia's charm and elegance. She was the kind of woman who always seemed to have it together, with her stunning outfits, dazzling smile, and a knack for making everyone feel special. Julia was more than just pretty. She had this way of lighting up a room, making even the shyest person feel included. Neighbors loved her, kids adored her, and her friends often said she was the glue that held their social circle together. Her husband, Harry, was equally impressive. He was a successful lawyer, known for winning big cases and being fiercely dedicated to his work. People said he was as sharp as they come, with his clean-cut looks, tailored suits, and smooth voice. Harry was the kind of man who could convince anyone of anything. Clients trusted him, colleagues respected him, and Julia, she supported him every step of the way. Proud to be his wife, together they seemed unstoppable. For 10 years their lives appeared perfect. From the outside, they lived in a gorgeous house with a man-made lawn, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. They threw the best parties, often hosting dinner events that people talked about for weeks afterward. Julia was the queen of planning, always making sure everything looked and felt magical. Her parties were famous for their delicious food, lively music, and fun themes. This year, Julia decided to plan something extra special. Harry was turning 30, and she wanted the party to be unforgettable. She worked for months, picking the perfect decorations, arranging catering from the town's fanciest restaurant, and even hiring a live band to entertain the guests. It was going to be the event of the year, and everyone was excited. But as Julia worked tirelessly on the party, she couldn't ignore a nagging feeling deep in her gut. For the past year, something had been different. Harry wasn't the same. He used to come home excited to share stories from his day. But lately he'd been quiet. He'd spend hours locked away in his office, or say he had to stay late at work. His phone seemed glued to his hand, and he was always guarding it, which was strange because they'd always shared everything. At first, Julia brushed it off. He's just stressed, she told herself. Harry had been working on a massive case that could make or break his career. Maybe he needed space, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. Julia noticed little things, receipts for expensive items. She'd never seen the way Harry's mood would shift when certain texts popped up on his phone, and his vague explanations when she asked about his long hours. Still, Julia tried to push her doubts aside. She loved Harry, and she wanted to believe in him. They had built a life together, and she wasn't ready to let her worries ruin that. Instead, she poured her energy into making the party perfect. She imagined Harry's face lighting up with surprise when he saw everything she'd planned. She pictured their friends and family laughing and dancing late into the night. Julia wanted it to be a celebration of their love, a reminder of how far they'd come. But deep down, the knees never left her. There were moments when she'd catch herself staring at Harry, trying to figure out if she even recognized the man she'd married. He seemed distant, like he was living in a world she couldn't reach. Julia hated feeling like she didn't know the whole story. It was like there was a wall between them when she didn't know how to break down. As the party day drew closer, Julia began to notice more cracks in their perfect life. There were whispers in the neighborhood, people hinting that Harry's reputation wasn't as spotless as it seemed. Julia tried to ignore the gossip, but the doubts grew louder. Was she imagining things, or was something really wrong? She decided to trust her instincts. In the weeks leading up to the party, Julia started digging. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed answers. What she found left her breathless. Her world, once so perfect and secure, suddenly felt like it was built on a lie. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Julia didn't let it show. If there was one thing she was good at, it was keeping up the appearances. She threw herself even harder into the party planning, determined not to let anyone suspect a thing. Her friends marveled at how calm and collected she seemed, but Julia was just holding it together by a thread. The day of the party arrived, and the house was transformed into a dazzling wonderland. String lights twinkled in the backyard. Tables were covered in elegant white linens, and the air buzzed with excitement. Guests arrived, dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate Harry's big milestone. Harry himself looked every bit the part of the happy, successful man as he greeted his friends with his signature charm. But Julia knew the truth. Beneath the glitz and glamour of the party, there was a storm brewing, one that would change everything she had spent years building, the image of a perfect life. But now she was ready to shatter it. Tonight wasn't just a celebration, it was going to be a reckoning. Julia stood in the middle of the crowd, champagne glass in hand, smiling as the guests laughed and chatted around her. Her heart pounded in her chest. Not with excitement, but with determination. This was her moment. This was the night the truth would come out and Harry's double life would finally be exposed. Julia's unease didn't fade. After the party planning started, it grew. It was like a shadow that followed her everywhere, whispering doubts. She tried so hard to silence. She told herself she was overthinking things. Harry was busy, his job was demanding, but deep down she knew something wasn't right. It began with the late-night calls. Harry would step outside to get some air, phone in hand, speaking in a hushed voice. When Julia asked who it was, his answers were always vague work stuff. He'd say, brushing her off with a quick kiss on the forehead. She wanted to believe him, but the way he acted made her stomach twist. Why was he hiding then? There were the absences. Harry was always working later, so he claimed. Julia had never questioned it before, but lately his excuses didn't add up. One Friday evening, she decided to surprise him by bringing dinner to his office. She imagined his face lighting up when he saw her, a sweet moment to bring them closer. But when she got there, his office was dark, and the receptionist said he'd left hours ago. Julia's heart sank. Where was he? She drove home that night in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The doubt was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. The clue came when Julia stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see. She was organizing paperwork in their home office when she found a receipt tucked into a drawer. It was for an expensive bracelet from a high-end jewelry store. Julia's first thought was that Harry was planning a surprise gift for her. She felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe she'd been wrong about everything. But the bracelet never came. Instead, more receipts followed. Dinner at a fancy restaurant. Julia had never been to a hotel stay she knew nothing about. And then the one that shattered her illusions completely. Plane tickets for two to a tropical island, dated 6 months. Ago. Julia had never been on that trip. Her hand shook as she held the ticket. Her chest felt tight, like she couldn't breathe. The evidence was piling up, and it pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Harry was hiding something big. Still, Julia didn't want to jump to conclusions. She needed proof. She needed to know the truth before she confronted him. That's when she made the decision to hire a private investigator. It was a step she never thought she'd take. But Julia was determined. If Harry was lying to her, she deserved to know. The investigator, a non-nonsense woman named Archer, listened carefully as Julia explained her suspicions. Archer assured her that she would find out what was going on. These things are never easy, she said, but you're brave for wanting to know the truth. The days that followed were some of the longest of Julia's life. She went about her routine, smiling at neighbors and planning the party, all while waiting for Archer's updates. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped. She tried to prepare herself for what she might hear, but nothing could have truly prepared her for the moment Archer called and said, "We need to meet." Julia sat across from Archer in a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup she didn't intend to drink. Archer slid a folder across the table. "I'm so sorry, Julia," she said softly. Julia's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were pictures of Harry with another woman. They were holding hands, laughing and kissing like they were the only two people in the world. Julia's eyes blurred with tears as she flipped through the images. There were snapshots of them at a restaurant, walking in a park, and even checking into a hotel together. The woman's name was Sabrina. She was younger than Julia, with long dark hair and a glamorous style that made Julia feel plain in comparison. According to Archer, Harry had been seeing Sabrina for 3 years. 3 years. Julia's stomach churned as she thought about all the time she had trusted him, all the times he had looked her in the eyes and lied. She couldn't stop the flood of memories. The nights he came home late and claimed he was stuck in meetings. The moments when she had felt his distance but pushed it aside, convincing herself that she was imagining things. How could he have done this to her? Archer reached across the table and placed a hand on Julia. "I know this is overwhelming," she said gently, "but you're not alone. You have options." Julia nodded, though her mind was spinning. She thanked Archer and left the cafe, clutching the folder tightly. When she got home, she sat on the couch and stared at the photos spread out before her. The perfect life she had worked so hard to build had been a lie, but Julia wasn't going to crumble. She wasn't going to let Harry's betrayal define her. Instead, She made a decision. The party she had been planning would still happen, but it wouldn't be the celebration Harry was expecting. It would be the night his double life came crashing down. Julia didn't shed a tear after that night. Her heartbreak turned into determination, and she knew exactly what she needed to do if Harry thought he could keep living his double life without consequences. He was wrong. She would expose him, not in a quiet conversation at home, but in front of everyone. He valued the party she had been planning for months would go ahead, but it wasn't going to be the celebration Harry expected. Julia's mind buzzed with ideas as she laid out her plan, each step carefully crafted to ensure the truth came out at the perfect moment. She wanted Harry to feel the weight of his lies, just as she had when she discovered them. The first step was sending out the invitations. Everyone who mattered to Harry was on the guest list. His closest friends, family members, and colleagues. She even added a few of her own friends for good measure. But the most important guest was Sabrina. Julia knew invited Sabrina was risky, but it was the only way to make her plan work. She asked Archer, the private investigator, for Sabrina's contact information and sent her a personal invitation. In the note, Julia pretended to be a clueless, loving wife, writing about how much Harry's milestone birthday meant to her and how she wanted everyone special in his life to attend. It was a gamble, but Sabrina replied almost immediately, accepting the invitation with that step complete. Julia turned her attention to the seating arrangement. She spent hours sketching out the table plan, making sure Sabrina would be seated in the perfect spot. Julia placed her close to Harry, but not too close to arouse suspicion. Before the big reveal, it was like setting up pieces on a chessboard. Every move mattered as the big day approached. Julia threw herself into the party preparations with even more energy than before. She ordered the finest decorations, the best food, and a stunning cake that was almost too beautiful. The backyard was transformed into a glowing wonderland, with string lights draped from tree to tree and elegant table set under the stars. Julia wanted everything to look perfect, like the life she and Harry had pretended to live. But behind Julia's composed exterior, a storm of emotions brooded. She kept up appearances, smiling and laughing with neighbors and vendors, but inside she was a mix of nerves and anger. The thought of standing face to face with Harry and Sabrina, knowing what she knew, made her heart race still. She didn't let herself back down. On the morning of the party, Julia woke up early to oversee the final touches. She directed the catering team, arranged the floral centerpieces, and double-checked the seating chart one last time. Everything had to be perfect, not for Harry, but for the moment. She would take control of the narrative by evening. The backyard was buzzing with excitement as guests began to arrive. Julia stood at the entrance, greeting everyone with her signature warm smile. Friends and family gushed over how stunning the setup was, and Harry, oblivious to what was coming, beamed with pride as he mingled with the crowd. Julia's eyes darted around the party as she waited for Sabrina to arrive. She didn't have to wait long. Sabrina walked in about 30 minutes after the party started, wearing a sleek black dress and looking every bit as confident as Julia had expected. Julia's stomach churned at the sight of her, but she kept her composure. "Welcome, Sabrina," Julia said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I'm so glad you could make it. Harry will be thrilled to see you." Sabrina smiled politely, clearly unaware that Julia knew who she was. Julia led her to the seating area, her heart pounding as she placed her in the carefully chosen spot. As the night unfolded, Julia floated through the party, chatting with guests and keeping a close eye on Sabrina. She noticed how Harry's demeanor shifted when he spotted her. His confident smile faltered for a split second, but he quickly covered it up. Julia caught his glance, and he looked nervous, though he tried to mask it with charm. The tension in the air was palpable, though no one else seemed to notice. Julia played her role perfectly, acting as if nothing was wrong. She laughed at jokes, clinked glasses during toasts, and even danced a little when the band started playing, but inside she was counting down the minutes until her carefully planned moment of truth. As the evening progressed, Julia began to feel a strange sense of calm. The anger that had fueled her plan gave way to clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her power, showing Harry that he couldn't manipulate her or control her any longer. Finally, it was time for the toast. Julia stepped onto the small stage they had set up near the dining area. A champagne glass in hand, the crowd quieted down, turning their attention to her. She smiled warmly, her gaze briefly meeting Harry's before sweeping across the room. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Harry's 40th birthday. This is such a special occasion, and I'm so grateful to share it with all of you. The guests clapped and cheered, and Julia waited for the noise to settle before continuing. She glanced at Sabrina, whose smile wavered ever so slightly in honor of this milestone. Thought it would be fitting to share something truly unforgettable about Harry, something that even he might not expect. Julia's voice was steady, but her heart raced as she prepared for the moment that would change everything. The truth was about to come out, and there was no turning back. Julia stood on the small stage, the spotlight on her as dozens of faces looked up expectantly. The soft glow of string lights made the setting feel magical, but Julia's heart was racing. She gripped the champagne glass tightly, her knuckles white as she steadied herself. This was it. The moment everything would come crashing down. Thank you all for being here tonight. Julia began, her voice warm and steady. It means so much to have friends and family here to celebrate Harry's 38th birthday. He's worked so hard and he's accomplished so much. Actually deserves this special evening. The crowd clapped politely, some guests raising their glasses to toast Harry, who stood in the center of the gathering. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Julia noticed the nervous glance he threw Sabrina's way, and her resolve hardened. Julia continued, her voice calm but laced with emotion. For 10 years, I've been lucky enough to be Harry's wife. I've seen his dedication, his ambition, and his love for our family. He's been my partner, my rock, and my best friend. Or so I thought. A slight murmur rippled through the crowd. Julia's words hung in the air, their weight starting to settle on the guests. Harry's smile froze and he shifted uncomfortably, his brow furrowing as he tried to read her expression. I've always believed that honesty is the foundation of any relationship, Julia said, her voice growing firmer, and tonight I want to honor that belief by being honest with all of you. She paused, taking a deep breath as she prepared for the bombshell. Over the past few months, I've come to learn something about Harry that has shaken me to my core. It's a truth I never wanted to face, but I feel it's only fair to share it tonight on this milestone occasion. Julia turned to the side of the stage, nodding at the tech assistant she had hired for the evening. The screen behind her lit up, and the first image appeared, a photo of Harry and Sabrina holding hands at a restaurant. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by a stunned silence. Harry's face turned pale. Julia, what are you doing? He hissed, stepping forward as if he could stop her. But Julia didn't falter. This, she said, pointing to the screen, is just one example of what I've discovered. Harry has been living a double life for 3 years. He's been seeing another woman, Sabrina. She gestured toward Sabrina, whose face was now as red as the wine in her glass. The guests turned to look at Sabrina, their expressions a mix of shock, confusion, and judgment. Sabrina stood frozen, her eyes darting between Harry and Julia. I didn't know, she stammered. Other voice was drowned out by the murmurs rising from the crowd. Julia pressed on, her voice unwavering. This isn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. I have receipts for photos and even a timeline of their relationship. Harry didn't just betray me. He lied to all of us, to the friends and family who trusted him, to the colleagues who respected him. Harry, composure cracked. Julia, stop this, he said, his voice rising in anger. You're making a scene. Julia raised an eyebrow, her tone sharp. A scene, I think. You made a scene when you decided to bring another woman into our lives while pretending to be a devoted husband. The screen flickered as more photos appeared, images of Harry and Sabrina on vacations at hotels and sharing intimate moments. The room was silent except for the whispers and gasps from the guests. Sabrina, visibly shaken, tried to slip away, but Julia was quicker. She stepped down from the stage, cutting off Sabrina's path. Where are you going, Sabrina? Julia asked, her voice icy. You're just as much a part of this as he is. Did you think you could sneak into my party and walk away without consequences? I didn't know he was married at first. Sabrina mumbled, her voice trembling. And by the time I found out, by the time you found out, you stayed. Julie interrupted. You helped him lie, and now you're both going to face the truth. The crowd watched, stunned and awkward, unsure of whether to intervene or stay quiet. Some guests exchanged awkward glances, while others muttered their disbelief. Harry now, desperate, tried to salvage what little dignity he had left Julia. "Please, we can talk about this privately," he pleaded privately. Julia repeated, her voice laced with anger. "You mean the way you carried on your affair behind closed doors?" "No, Harry, this isn't a private matter anymore. You humiliated me in secret, so I'm exposing the truth in public." Harry's jaw tightened, his denial crumbling under the weight of the evidence. He looked around at the faces of his friends, family and colleagues, all of whom were now seeing him for who he truly was. The silence was deafening. As Julia turned back to the crowd, "I want all of you to know that I didn't do this to embarrass myself or ruin this evening. I did this because I refused to be a victim of lies and betrayal. From this moment forward, I'm taking back my life." The guests clapped hesitantly at first, then more fervently, as they began to understand Julia's bravery. Harry stood rooted to the spot. His shoulders slumped as Julia turned and walked away. Her head held high. The perfect image of their marriage was shattered. But Julia no longer cared. She wasn't defined by Harry's betrayal. She was free, and that was worth everything. The backyard, once filled with laughter and celebration, was now heavy with tension. Julia's stunning revelation left everyone in shock. For a few moments, the partygoers stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. The screen behind Julia still displayed images of Harry and Sabrina, together, their secret lives exposed for all to see. Sabrina was the first to break the silence. "I don't have to stay here for this," she snapped, her voice trembling as she grabbed her purse and started toward the exit. "Sabrina," Harry called after her, panic in his voice. He stepped forward, reaching out, but she brushed past him without even looking back. "I can't believe you let this happen," she hissed, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Within seconds, she was gone. The gate slamming behind her, all eyes turned back to Harry. He stood there, his usually confident posture replaced with slumped shoulders and a pale face. The Harry everyone thought they knew, the polished, successful lawyer with the perfect life, was gone, replaced by a man who looked small and defeated. "Julia, we need to talk," he said, his voice desperate. "There's nothing left to talk about." Julia replied firmly. She folded her arms, her head held high as she stared him down. "You made your choices, Harry. Now you can live with the consequences." Some of the guests, still stunned, began whispering among themselves. Others quietly excused themselves, clearly comfortable with the tension. A few of Julia's closest friends moved closer to her, offering silent support. "You think this is fair?" Harry said, his voice rising as he tried to salvage his dignity. "You blindsided me in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what this will do to my career?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "Your career? That's what you're worried about? Not the fact that you lied to me, betrayed me, and disrespected our marriage?" Typical Harry's face turned red, but he didn't argue. He seemed to realize that no words could fix the mess he had created. Instead, he muttered something under his breath, grabbed his car keys, and stormed out. His departure was anything but graceful, and the sound of his car speeding down the street was the last trace of him that night. With Harry gone, the tension began to ease. Guests slowly started leaving, murmuring awkward goodbyes as they went. A few brave ones approached Julia to tell her how strong she was, how proud they were of her courage. Julia smiled politely, though her emotions were still raw when the last guest left. Julia finally allowed herself to breathe. The backyard was empty now, the string lights still twinkling as if nothing had happened. The decorations and tables stood as silent witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded. Julia sat down on one of the chairs, the weight of the evening pressing down on her. For a moment, she felt like crying. But then a strange calm washed over her. She realized she wasn't even angry anymore. What she felt was relief. For so long, Julia had been living in doubt, questioning herself, wondering if she was imagining things. But tonight she had taken back control. She had exposed the truth, and while it wasn't easy, it was necessary. As she looked around the empty backyard, memories of the evening replayed in her mind. She thought about Sabrina storming out, about Harry's pitiful excuses, and about the way the guest had reacted. But most of all, she thought about herself. Thanks for watching True Crime Cases.